Blood Brothers, A Tale of Betrayal and Nuclear Revenge. My name is Daniel Matthews, and for 24 years I lived in the shadow of a brother who could do no wrong. Growing up in the Matthews household meant understanding a simple truth. No matter what I achieved, no matter how hard I worked, no matter how perfect I tried to be, I would always be second best to my younger brother, Michael. Michael wasn't born to be the favorite. In fact, he almost wasn't born at all. When my mother, Catherine, was pregnant with Michael, complications arose during the 7th month that nearly killed them both. Placental abruption, they called it, a condition where the placenta separates from the uterine wall, cutting off oxygen and nutrients to the baby. My mother spent 3 months on bed rest while doctors monitored every heartbeat, every movement, waiting to see if my little brother would survive. Michael was born 6 weeks premature, weighing barely 4 pounds, his tiny body connected to more machines than seemed possible. I was 7 years old, standing outside the NICU window, watching this fragile creature fight for every breath while my parents prayed over his incubator. The doctors said he might not make it through his first week, then his first month, then his first year. But Michael Matthews was a fighter. He survived, but the early trauma left its mark. Throughout our childhood, Michael was frequently sick, respiratory infections, allergies, an immune system that seemed to treat every common cold like a life-threatening illness. While I ran around the neighborhood playing baseball and climbing trees, Michael spent his days indoors, reading books and building elaborate Lego creations while my mother hovered nearby, watching for any sign that he might need medical attention. My parents' protective instincts were understandable, even admirable. They'd nearly lost their youngest son, and they were determined to give him every advantage, every opportunity, every ounce of love and support he needed to thrive. What they didn't seem to understand was how their devotion to Michael affected me. The first incident I remember clearly happened when I was 12 and Michael was 5. I'd been saving my allowance for months to buy a new bicycle, a red Schwinn with racing stripes that I'd seen at the local bike shop. I'd done extra chores, helped neighbors with yard work, and finally accumulated the $75 I needed. The same week I planned to buy my bike, Michael saw a remote-controlled airplane at a toy store and decided he wanted it. The airplane cost $80, $5 more than I'd saved for my bicycle. "Mom," I said, showing her the money I'd earned, "I'm going to buy my bike this Saturday." "That's wonderful, Daniel," she replied, but I could see her attention was elsewhere. Michael was playing quietly in the corner, occasionally coughing, a sound that immediately drew our mother's focus. That evening at dinner, Michael mentioned the airplane. "Dad, there's this really cool plane at Morrison's Toys. It flies by remote control and does loops and everything." "How much does it cost, buddy?" my father asked. $80, but I don't have that much money." My parents exchanged a look, one of those silent conversations that married couples have across dinner tables. "You know what?" my mother said. "You've been so good about taking your medicine lately, and you haven't complained about missing baseball practice because of your asthma. I think you deserve something special." The next day, Michael got his airplane, and I learned that sometimes being good, being responsible, and working hard mattered less than being the child whose survival had once been uncertain. "Daniel," my father explained when I asked why Michael got his toy while I was still saving for my bicycle, "your brother has had a much harder time than you have. Sometimes we need to make exceptions for people who have struggled more. But I worked for months to save that money. And that's admirable. It shows character, but Michael needs extra support right now." I bought my bicycle 2 months later, using money from my 13th birthday. By then, Michael had grown bored with his airplane and moved on to wanting a chemistry set. The pattern repeated throughout our adolescence, with variations that always led to the same conclusion. Michael's needs, wants, and mistakes were treated with understanding and accommodation, while mine were met with lectures about responsibility and consequences. When I was 15, I accidentally broke a neighbor's window while playing baseball in our backyard. My parents made me pay for the replacement out of my part-time job earnings and write a formal letter of apology. When Michael was 12, he broke the same neighbor's ceramic garden gnome while riding his bike on their lawn. My mother brought them a replacement and explained that Michael was still learning to control his bike because his medications sometimes affected his coordination. When I brought home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B+, my father asked why I'd let my mathematics grade slip. When Michael brought home a report card with 3 B's and 2 C's, my parents celebrated his improvement and took him out for ice cream. When I was caught sneaking out to meet friends at a late-night movie, I was grounded for a month and lost my phone privileges. When Michael was caught sneaking out to meet a girl when he was 16, my parents sat him down for a serious conversation about being honest with them, then extended his curfew by an hour. Michael's social development has been delayed by his health issues, my mother explained when I pointed out the inconsistency. He needs more freedom to catch up with his peers. What about my social development? I asked. Daniel, you've always been mature for your age. You don't need the same accommodations. By the time I was a senior in high school, I'd learned that maturity and responsibility were punishments, not rewards. Being dependable meant being taken for granted. Being capable meant being expected to solve everyone else's problems while receiving little support for my own. Michael, meanwhile, had grown into a healthy, charismatic teenager who'd learned to use his childhood health struggles as a trump card for getting whatever he wanted. He was no longer the fragile child who needed extra protection, but my parents couldn't seem to adjust their treatment of him. Or maybe they didn't want to. The final straw came during my senior year, when college application season arrived. I'd worked my entire high school career toward one goal, earning a full scholarship to a prestigious university. My grades were perfect. My SAT scores were in the 99th percentile, and I'd participated in every extracurricular activity that might strengthen my applications. Northwestern University offered me a full academic scholarship, tuition, room, board, and a stipend for books and personal expenses. It was everything I dreamed of, a chance to escape the suffocating dynamics of the Matthews household and build my own identity. When I shared the news at dinner, my parents' reaction was complicated. "That's wonderful, Daniel," my mother said, but her voice lacked enthusiasm. "Though I have to say, I'm not sure how we'll manage without you here." "What do you mean?" "Well, you help so much with Michael's appointments and you drive him places when we can't. Plus, Northwestern is so far away, we'd hardly ever see you." "Mom, this is a full scholarship to one of the best universities in the country." "I know, and we're proud of you, but have you considered staying closer to home? The University of Illinois has a fine program, and you could commute from here." I stared at her, realizing that even my greatest academic achievement was being viewed through the lens of how it would affect Michael's convenience. "Catherine," my father said quietly, "let's not discourage Daniel from pursuing his opportunities." "I'm not discouraging him. I'm just saying that family should be a consideration in these decisions." That night, Michael knocked on my bedroom door. "Hey," he said, settling into the chair at my desk. "Congratulations on the scholarship." "Thanks. Are you really going to Northwestern?" "That's the plan." Michael nodded slowly, but something in his expression made me uncomfortable. He looked almost pleased by the prospect of my leaving. "It'll be weird without you here," he said, "but I guess it'll also mean more attention from Mom and Dad." The casual way he acknowledged the family dynamics we'd both grown up with was startling in its honesty. "Michael," I said carefully, "do you think our parents treat us differently?" "Of course they do," he replied without hesitation. I'm the sick kid who almost died. You're the responsible one who can take care of himself. They've been treating us differently our whole lives. And that doesn't bother you." Michael shrugged. "Why would it bother me? I get what I want, and you get to feel superior about working for everything you have. Seems like it works out for everyone." It was the first time my brother had ever acknowledged the favoritism so directly, and his complete lack of guilt or awareness about how it affected me was more painful than years of subtle bias. That summer, as I prepared for college, I made a promise to myself. I was going to Northwestern not just for the education, but to build a life where my worth wasn't determined by comparison to Michael Matthews. I was going to find people who valued me for who I was, not for who I wasn't. I was going to prove that being the responsible one, the mature one, the one who worked for everything he achieved, was actually an advantage in the real world. What I didn't know was that even 100 miles away from home, Michael's shadow would follow me, and the lesson I'd learned about his ability to take whatever he wanted would soon apply to the most important thing in my life. Northwestern University in the fall felt like stepping into a different world. The campus was beautiful, with Gothic buildings and Lake Michigan stretching endlessly to the horizon, but more importantly, it was a place where no one knew me as Michael Matthews' older brother, or the responsible one. Here I was just Daniel Matthews, scholarship student, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. My dorm room was small but mine, decorated with posters I'd chosen and books I'd bought with my own money. My roommate was a pre-med student from California who spent most of his time studying, which suited me perfectly. After years of being responsible for someone else's needs and schedule, the solitude was luxurious. I threw myself into college life with the intensity of someone making up for lost time. I joined the debate team, started writing for the campus newspaper, and took on a work-study job at the library that helped cover my personal expenses. For the first time in years, my achievements were mine alone, not measured against Michael's needs or compared to his different standards. It was during my second semester, while working an evening shift at the library, that I first noticed her. She came in every night around 8 p.m., always carrying the same worn leather satchel and a large coffee that she'd make last for hours. She was beautiful in an understated way. Long auburn hair that she usually wore in a simple ponytail, intelligent green eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a focused intensity when she studied that I found mesmerizing. What caught my attention wasn't just her beauty, though. It was her dedication. While other students came and went, socializing and procrastinating, she worked with the single-minded focus of someone for whom education wasn't just an opportunity but a necessity. I watched her for weeks before finding the courage to approach. "Excuse me," I said one evening as she packed up her books. "I'm Daniel. I work here in the evenings and I couldn't help noticing that you're here every single night. That's impressive dedication." She looked up at me with those green eyes, and I saw something there that I recognized, the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust easily. "I'm Emma," she said simply, "and I'm here every night because I have to be." Have to be. Emma studied my face for a moment, as if deciding whether I was worth the energy of explanation. "I'm on a full academic scholarship," she said finally. "If my GPA drops below 3.8, I lose everything. And unlike most students here, I don't have parents to fall back on if that happens." The way she said, "parents," told me everything I needed to know, and I felt a connection to her that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with recognition. "I'm on a full scholarship too," I said, "and I know what it feels like to have everything riding on your own performance." Something shifted in Emma's expression, not quite trust, but at least interest. "What's your major?" she asked. "Economics and political science. I want to go into policy work, maybe government. You?" "Pre-med. I want to be a pediatric surgeon." The ambition in her voice was unmistakable, and I found myself wanting to know more about this serious, driven girl who studied alone every night. "Would you like to get coffee sometime?" I asked. "I mean, beyond the library vending machine coffee that you drink every night." For the first time, Emma smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "I'd like that," she said. Our first official date was at a small cafe near campus, where Emma ordered black coffee, and I learned more about her background. She'd been in foster care since she was 8, when her parents died in a car accident. She'd bounced between homes for most of her childhood, never staying anywhere long enough to form lasting attachments. "I learned early that the only person you can really count on is yourself," she told me as we shared a piece of apple pie. "School was the only constant in my life, the only thing that was mine regardless of which family I was living with, so I got very, very good at it." "What about friends, relationships?" Emma shrugged. "Hard to maintain friendships when you're moving every 6 months. And relationships." She paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I guess I never learned how to trust people enough for anything serious." "What about now?" "Now I'm too busy trying to build a future to worry about the present." But as we continued talking, I could see that Emma was curious about me too. She asked about my family, and I found myself telling her about the Matthews household dynamics in ways I'd never articulated before. "So your brother gets special treatment because he was sick as a child?" she asked. "That's part of it, but I think it's more complicated than that. My parents nearly lost him, so he represents this precious thing they had to fight to keep. I was just there, healthy, capable, not requiring any special attention." That must have been difficult. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that my situation might have been difficult, rather than privileged. "It was," I admitted, "but it also made me independent, self-reliant. Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing." Emma nodded slowly. "Independence is a survival skill, but it's also lonely." Over the following months, Emma and I developed a relationship unlike anything I'd experienced before. We were both serious students, both driven by circumstances beyond our control, both carrying the weight of having to create our own support systems. But we were also learning how to not be alone. Emma started joining me for dinner in the dining hall, and I began bringing her coffee during her library study sessions. We studied together, walked along the lake on weekends, and gradually shared the stories of our childhood that had shaped who we'd become. "You know what I realized?" Emma said one evening as we sat on the beach watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. "We're both orphans in a way. You might have parents, but you've been emotionally on your own for as long as I have." She was right. While Emma had lost her parents through tragedy, I'd lost mine through favoritism and emotional neglect. We'd both learned to be self-sufficient, to not expect support or understanding from the adults who were supposed to provide it. But we'd also found something in each other that neither of us had expected. Someone who understood what it meant to work for everything you had, to never take anything for granted, to build your own worth rather than inheriting it. Our relationship deepened naturally, without the drama or complexity that seemed to characterize our classmates' romantic lives. We were both too focused, too driven, too aware of what we stood to lose to waste time on games or jealousy. Emma would fall asleep in my dorm room while studying, her head on my shoulder as I worked on economic theory papers. I would bring her soup when she was too focused to remember to eat. We celebrated each other's academic successes and provided comfort during the inevitable stresses of maintaining perfect GPAs. "Daniel," Emma said one night during our junior year, as we lay in my narrow dorm bed talking about our future plans, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "I love you, not in some dramatic movie romance way. But I love that you understand me, that you don't expect me to be anything other than who I am, that you work as hard as I do, and never make me feel guilty about my priorities. I turned to face her in the darkness, seeing her serious expression in the moonlight coming through my window. "I love you too," I said. "You're the first person in my life who's ever valued me for being responsible, for working hard, for being independent. With you, those aren't burdens, they're assets." "So what happens after graduation?" she asked. "You go to medical school. I go to graduate school or start working in policy, and we figure out how to do it together." Together? Emma, I can't imagine building a future that doesn't include you. We're both used to doing everything alone, but maybe we don't have to anymore. The night I proposed to Emma during the spring of our senior year was simple and perfect. We were in our usual spot at the library, surrounded by books and the comfortable silence of two people who'd learned to work side by side. I'd hidden the ring, modest but beautiful, bought with money I'd saved from my work-study job, inside her favorite poetry book. "Will you marry me?" I asked as she stared at the ring in shock. "Daniel, yes, but I need to ask you something." "Anything." "I don't have family to share this with. No parents to give us their blessing, no relatives to invite to a wedding. Would you be okay with a small ceremony, just us and whatever friends we want to include?" "Emma, all I need is you." But even as I said it, I knew there was something we'd have to address eventually. Emma might not have family, but I did. And despite years of feeling undervalued and overshadowed, part of me still wanted my parents' approval and support for this decision. "Actually," I said carefully, "I think we should visit my family before we make any final plans. Not because we need their permission, but because I want them to meet you. I want them to see how incredible you are." Emma looked uncertain. "Daniel, based on everything you've told me about your family dynamics, are you sure that's a good idea?" "Probably not, but Emma, you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. I want to share that with them, even if they don't deserve it." What I didn't tell Emma was that part of me also wanted to prove something to my parents and Michael. I wanted them to see that the responsible, independent son they'd taken for granted had found someone extraordinary. I wanted them to realize that maybe, just maybe, they'd underestimated me. It was a desire that would lead to the greatest betrayal and most devastating revenge of my life. The drive from Northwestern to the Matthews family home in suburban Chicago felt longer than the actual 90 minutes it took. Emma sat beside me in my aging Honda Civic, nervously adjusting her skirt and checking her appearance in the visor mirror. "You look beautiful," I told her for the third time. "They're going to love you." Emma had chosen her outfit carefully, a modest blue dress that was elegant but not flashy, paired with the pearl earrings she'd inherited from her foster mother who'd been kindest to her. She wanted to make a good impression, though I could see the tension in her shoulders that suggested she was prepared for disappointment. "Tell me again what I should know about your family," she said as we turned onto my childhood street. "My mom, Catherine, is a high school English teacher. She's protective of Michael, but she has a good heart. My dad, Robert, is an accountant. He's more reserved, sometimes skeptical of new people. And Michael is 21 now, finishing his junior year at the University of Illinois. He's charming when he wants to be." "And they all favor Michael." "They all favor Michael," I confirmed. "But Emma, that's about their issues, not about anything wrong with you or me. Don't let their dynamics make you doubt yourself." The Matthews house was a two-story colonial in a well-maintained neighborhood, with a front yard that my father obsessively landscaped every weekend. It looked exactly as I'd left it, comfortable, middle-class, and somehow smaller than I remembered. My mother answered the door before we'd even knocked, her face lighting up with genuine pleasure at seeing me. "Daniel," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug, "you look wonderful. College has been good to you." "Thanks, Mom. I'd like you to meet Emma Richardson. Emma, this is my mother, Catherine." Emma extended her hand with the polite smile she used when meeting new people, but my mother surprised us both by pulling her into a warm hug instead. Emma, it's so wonderful to finally meet you. Daniel has told us so much about you in his letters. I watched my mother's face as she took in Emma's appearance, the simple elegance, the genuine warmth in her green eyes, the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. I could see my mother processing the fact that her son had somehow attracted this obviously exceptional woman. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Matthews," Emma said. "Daniel's told me so much about his family." "Please call me Catherine. Come in, come in. Robert is in the den and Michael should be home any minute." As we walked through the familiar hallway, I noticed my mother stealing glances at Emma, her expression a mixture of surprise and what looked like impressed bewilderment. It was as if she couldn't quite believe that her reliable but unremarkable older son had managed to find such a remarkable girlfriend. My father's reaction was less enthusiastic. "So this is Emma," he said, standing up from his recliner to shake her hand. His tone was polite but cool, and I could see him evaluating her with the suspicious expression he reserved for door-to-door salespeople and unsolicited credit card offers. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Matthews," Emma said, maintaining her composure despite the obvious lack of warmth in his greeting. "Northwestern, is it?" my father asked. "Expensive school. I assume you're on financial aid." "Dad," I said, a warning in my voice. "It's okay, Daniel," Emma replied calmly. "Yes, I'm on a full academic scholarship. I'm studying to be a doctor." "A doctor," my father repeated, his tone suggesting he found this implausible. "That's ambitious. What kind of backup plan do you have?" The question was insulting in its implication that Emma wasn't capable of achieving her goals, and I saw her jaw tighten slightly before she responded. "I don't believe in backup plans, Mr. Matthews. When you want something as much as I want to be a pediatric surgeon, you don't waste time preparing for failure." My mother quickly intervened. "That's a wonderful attitude, Emma. We need more dedicated young women in medicine." Before my father could respond with another skeptical comment, the front door opened and Michael walked in. At 21, my younger brother had grown into the kind of man who turned heads wherever he went. He was tall like me but broader through the shoulders, with the easy athleticism of someone who'd overcome his childhood health issues to become genuinely physically impressive. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his clothes were more expensive than mine, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his place in the world. "Danny," he said, using the nickname I'd always hated, and pulled me into one of those backslapping embraces that looked affectionate but felt like a competition. "Good to see you, big brother. Michael, I'd like you to meet Emma Richardson. Emma, my brother Michael." Michael turned his attention to Emma, and I watched his expression change as he took her in. His smile became warmer, more genuine, and his eyes lingered on her face longer than was strictly appropriate. "Emma," he said, taking her hand and holding it just a moment too long, "Daniel definitely undersold how beautiful you are." Emma smiled politely and extracted her hand from his grip, but I noticed her step slightly closer to me. "Thank you," she said. "Daniel's told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," Michael replied with the charming grin that had gotten him out of trouble our entire childhood. During dinner, I watched the familiar family dynamics play out, but now I was seeing them through Emma's eyes. My parents asked about my classes and internship applications with polite interest, but their questions for Michael about his social life and fraternity activities were animated with genuine curiosity and affection. "Michael's been elected vice president of his fraternity," my mother announced proudly, "and he's been invited to join the honors business program next year." "That's great," I said, though I knew Michael's grades weren't particularly impressive. The honors program invitation was probably due to his father's alumni connections rather than his academic achievements. "What about you, Daniel?" my father asked. Any leadership positions, extracurricular activities? I'm managing editor of the Policy Review Journal, and I've been accepted to 3 graduate programs, I replied. That sounds very academic, my mother said with the same tone she might use to describe a terminal illness. Throughout dinner, I noticed Michael's attention kept drifting to Emma. He asked her questions about her studies, complimented her insights about healthcare policy, and generally displayed more intellectual curiosity than I'd seen from him in years. Emma, he said as we finished dessert, you should let me show you around the neighborhood tomorrow. There are some beautiful walking trails you might enjoy. That's thoughtful, Emma replied diplomatically, but Daniel and I were planning to spend the day together. Of course, Michael said quickly. I just thought you might like to see more of where your future husband grew up. Something about the way he said, future husband, made me uncomfortable, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Later that evening, as Emma and I settled into my childhood bedroom, my parents had insisted she take Michael's room while he slept on the couch. She was unusually quiet. Everything okay? I asked. Your family is interesting, she said carefully. That's a diplomatic way of putting it. What did you really think? Emma sat on my bed and looked at me seriously. Your mother seems lovely, if a bit surprised that you're engaged to someone she considers attractive. Your father is skeptical of everything about me, which I expected based on what you told me. But Daniel. What? Your brother makes me uncomfortable. I felt a spike of defensive irritation. What do you mean? The way he looks at me. The way he held my hand too long when we met. The way he kept steering conversation toward me during dinner. It feels like he's interested in ways that aren't appropriate for his brother's fiancée. Emma, Michael's always been charming with women. It doesn't mean anything. This felt different from charm. Different how? Emma hesitated, clearly choosing her words carefully. Daniel, I've been in foster care. I've learned to recognize when men are looking at me in ways that aren't safe. Your brother isn't just being friendly. The suggestion that Michael might be attracted to my fiancée felt like an attack on both of them, and I reacted defensively. Emma, you don't know Michael. He's always been social and outgoing. Just because you're not used to that kind of personality. I'm not being paranoid, she interrupted, her voice sharp with hurt at my dismissal. I know the difference between friendly and predatory. Predatory? Emma, that's a pretty serious accusation to make about someone you just met. I'm not making an accusation. I'm telling you how his behavior made me feel, and I'm asking you to pay attention. The conversation ended with both of us frustrated and hurt. Emma because I hadn't believed her concerns, and me because I felt caught between defending my family and supporting my fiancé. What I didn't understand then was that Emma's instincts about Michael were absolutely correct, and my failure to listen to her was the first crack in what would become a devastating betrayal. Over the next few days, I watched my family's reaction to Emma evolve in ways that were both gratifying and disturbing. My mother became increasingly impressed with Emma's intelligence, grace, and obvious devotion to me. She started asking detailed questions about our wedding plans and making suggestions about local venues. My father remained skeptical, but seemed to grudgingly accept that Emma wasn't some gold digger who trapped his son. The fact that she was clearly smarter and more accomplished than he'd expected seemed to confuse rather than please him. But it was Michael's behavior that should have concerned me most. He found reasons to be wherever Emma was. When she helped my mother with dishes, Michael appeared to dry them. When she read in the backyard, Michael emerged to tend the garden nearby. When we watched movies in the family room, Michael positioned himself where he could study her profile without seeming obvious. Emma noticed, of course. She tried to stay close to me, to avoid being alone with Michael, to politely deflect his attempts at private conversation. but I was so focused on enjoying my family's growing acceptance of Emma that I missed the signs of her increasing discomfort. "Daniel," she said on our fourth night, "can we talk about maybe cutting this visit short?" "Why, I thought things were going well." "They are with your parents, but your brother," she trailed off, clearly frustrated by my previous dismissal of her concerns. "Emma, what specifically has Michael done that bothers you?" "This afternoon, when you went to the store with your father, he cornered me in the kitchen and told me how lucky you were to have found someone so perfect. Then he said he hoped you appreciated what you had, because if you ever didn't, there were other men who would." I felt a flicker of unease. That does sound inappropriate. It was the way he said it, Daniel, like he was making an offer, not just a general statement. "Did you tell him you were uncomfortable?" "I told him I was completely committed to you and looking forward to our marriage. He said he hoped I'd always feel that way." That evening, I decided to have a conversation with Michael. "Hey," I said, finding him alone in the garage where he was working on his car. "Can we talk?" "Sure, what's up?" "Emma mentioned that she feels like you might be paying too much attention to her, making her uncomfortable." Michael looked up from his engine with an expression of innocent surprise. "Uncomfortable? I'm just trying to make her feel welcome in our family. I think she's great, Danny. You're lucky to have found someone like that." "That's exactly what Emma said you told her. But Michael, she's my fiancée, your future sister-in-law. There are boundaries that need to be respected." "Of course there are, and I've been nothing but respectful." Michael's tone was reasonable, but something in his eyes looked calculating. "Daniel, are you sure Emma isn't just feeling insecure about fitting in with our family? Sometimes when people come from difficult backgrounds, they misinterpret friendly behavior as something threatening." The comment was perfectly designed to make me doubt Emma's concerns while positioning Michael as the understanding family member. And unfortunately, it worked. "Maybe you're right," I said, "but could you maybe tone down the attention a little, just to help her feel more comfortable?" "Of course. I want Emma to be comfortable here. After all, if you marry her, she'll be part of our family for a long time." That night, I told Emma about my conversation with Michael, expecting it to reassure her. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, disappointment mixed with something that looked almost like pity. "Daniel," she said quietly, "your brother just manipulated you into doubting me and making excuses for his behavior, and it worked perfectly." "That's not what happened." "That's exactly what happened. He made you think I was being paranoid and insecure, which means now if I have any other concerns about him, you'll assume I'm overreacting." Emma was right, but I was too defensive to admit it at the time. Instead, I convinced myself that she was being overly sensitive, that she was projecting her difficult past onto an innocent situation. It was exactly the kind of mistake that Michael had been counting on. By the end of our visit, my parents had given their blessing for our marriage and suggested we stay through the summer to plan a local wedding. "It would be so much more affordable than trying to organize something from Chicago," my mother said. "And think how special it would be to get married in your hometown, surrounded by family." Emma looked at me with clear reluctance, but she also understood my desire to have my family involved in our wedding. "If that's what you want," she said finally, "I can defer my summer internship and stay." "Are you sure?" "Daniel, the only family I have is you. If your family is important to you, then they're important to me too." As we settled into the routine of living with my parents while planning our wedding, Emma continued to express discomfort about Michael's behavior, but more subtly, less directly. She'd mentioned feeling watched or uncomfortable without specifically naming Michael, and I'd dismiss her concerns as stress about the wedding planning. What I didn't see was the systematic way Michael was manipulating the situation to isolate Emma and undermine her sense of security. He'd find excuses to be alone with her, always maintaining plausible deniability but gradually escalating his inappropriate behavior. He'd compliment her appearance when I wasn't around, make comments about how different she was from other women, and ask personal questions about our relationship that crossed obvious boundaries. More insidiously, he began subtly undermining her confidence in our relationship. He'd make casual comments about how I'd changed since college, how I seemed stressed by wedding planning, how he hoped I was ready for the responsibility of marriage. Daniel's always been the serious type, he told Emma one afternoon when I was out running errands. Sometimes I worry that he thinks of marriage as just another achievement to check off his list, rather than something romantic and passionate. Emma, already feeling isolated and uncertain in an unfamiliar family dynamic, began to internalize these doubts. She started questioning whether I truly loved her for who she was or whether I saw her as another accomplishment, another way to prove my worth to my parents. The cruel brilliance of Michael's strategy was that he never did anything overtly threatening or inappropriate, nothing that Emma could point to as clear evidence of wrongdoing. Instead, he created a constant state of low-level discomfort and doubt that gradually eroded her confidence in both him and me. By the time I finally understood what was happening, Michael had already set in motion the betrayal that would destroy everything Emma and I had built together. The trap was sprung on a humid Tuesday morning in July, while I was at the grocery store buying supplies for my mother's garden party. I still remember the weather that Tuesday morning, oppressively humid, with the kind of heavy air that promises thunderstorms by evening. I'd volunteered to run errands for my mother's garden party that weekend, partly because I was grateful for her efforts to include Emma in our family traditions, and partly because I needed some time away from the house to think. Emma had been distant for the past week, not in any obvious way, but in small gestures that I'd learned to recognize over our years together. She'd smile when I told her I loved her, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She'd hold my hand while we walked, but her grip felt dutiful rather than affectionate. When we were intimate, she was physically present but emotionally somewhere else. Pre-wedding nerves, my mother had diagnosed when I mentioned Emma's mood. All brides go through this. She's probably just overwhelmed by all the planning. But I knew Emma better than that. She didn't get overwhelmed by planning and organizing. Those were her strengths. Something else was bothering her, something she wasn't telling me, and I was starting to suspect it had to do with Michael. In recent days, I'd begun paying more attention to the interactions between my brother and my fiancée. Nothing overtly inappropriate, but a pattern of behavior that made me uncomfortable. Michael would find reasons to touch Emma's arm when making a point. He'd stand just slightly too close when they were in conversation. He'd compliment her appearance in ways that felt more personal than brotherly. Most troubling were the private conversations. I'd walk into a room to find Michael and Emma talking quietly, conversations that would stop abruptly when I appeared. Emma would explain that they'd been discussing wedding details or family stories, but something in her manner suggested there was more to it. That morning, as I drove to the grocery store, I decided to confront the situation directly. I would ask Emma specifically what was bothering her, and I would pay closer attention to Michael's behavior. If my brother was making my fiancée uncomfortable, it was my responsibility to address it. Family loyalty be damned. The grocery shopping took longer than expected. My mother's list was detailed and extensive, and the store was crowded with other people preparing for weekend gatherings. By the time I returned home, nearly 2 hours had passed. I pulled into the driveway and unloaded bags of vegetables, decorations, and party supplies, looking forward to finding Emma and suggesting we take a walk to discuss whatever was troubling her. Instead, I walked into a scene that would haunt me for years to come. Emma was sitting on our living room couch, sobbing with the kind of broken, desperate crying that comes from complete emotional devastation. My mother was beside her, one arm around Emma's shoulders, tears streaming down her own face. My father stood near the fireplace, his expression a mixture of anger and disappointment. Michael was positioned behind the couch, one hand on Emma's shoulder in what appeared to be a gesture of comfort and support. Everyone looked up when I entered, and the expressions on their faces told me immediately that I was walking into an ambush. "Daniel," my mother said, her voice thick with emotion, "we need to talk." "What's going on?" I asked, though something in my stomach was already twisting with dread. Emma looked up at me through her tears, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Disappointment so profound it was almost hatred. "How could you?" she whispered. "How could you do this to me?" "Emma, I don't understand." "Don't," she interrupted, her voice stronger now but still broken. "Don't pretend you don't know what we're talking about." I looked around the room at the faces of my family, searching for some clue about what was happening. "Daniel," my father said, his voice cold with disapproval, "Emma has told us about your extracurricular activities." "What extracurricular activities?" "Your affair," my mother said, the word seeming to cause her physical pain. "The woman you've been seeing behind Emma's back." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "What affair? Mom, I haven't been seeing anyone else. Emma is the only woman I've been with for 3 years." "Daniel," Michael said quietly, "lying about it is only going to make this worse." "I'm not lying. I have no idea what you're talking about." Emma stood up abruptly, pulling away from my mother's comforting embrace. "Stop it," she shouted. "Just stop lying to me." She reached into her purse and withdrew her cell phone, her hands shaking as she navigated to her text messages. "Read this," she said, thrusting the phone toward me. "Read what your girlfriend sent me." I took the phone and looked at the message thread. The contact was listed as Jessica with a phone number I didn't recognize. The messages were recent, sent just that morning. "Jessica, hi Emma. I'm sorry to contact you like this, but I think you deserve to know the truth about Daniel." "Emma, I'm sorry, who is this?" "Jessica, I'm the woman Daniel has been seeing for the past 6 months. I know you're engaged to him, and I know this is awful, but I can't keep lying anymore." "Emma, this isn't possible. Daniel wouldn't do this." "Jessica, I have proof. Photos, hotel receipts, messages. He told me you two were having problems, that the engagement was just for show to please his family. I believed him because I loved him." "Emma, why should I believe you?" "Jessica, because I'm pregnant, Emma. And I can't raise this baby believing that the father is going to choose me over you if he won't even acknowledge our relationship exists." I read through the messages with growing horror and disbelief. Someone had created an elaborate deception, complete with specific details and emotional manipulation, designed to convince Emma of my infidelity. "Emma," I said, looking up from the phone, "this is fake. I've never met anyone named Jessica. I've never been to any hotels with another woman. I've never had an affair." "Then explain the photos," Emma said, her voice flat with exhausted pain. "What photos?" Michael moved from behind the couch and handed me a manila envelope. "The ones that came with the messages, Danny." I opened the envelope and felt my world collapse. There were 6 photographs, all clearly taken with a telephoto lens from a distance, all showing me with a woman I'd never seen before. In the first photo, we appeared to be having coffee at a cafe I didn't recognize. In the second, we were walking hand in hand through a park. The third showed us embracing outside what looked like a hotel. The others were increasingly intimate, culminating in one that appeared to show us kissing passionately in the front seat of a car. The photos were expertly doctored, but so convincing that even I had to look closely to convince myself they weren't real. Someone had spent significant time and money creating evidence of an affair that had never happened. "These aren't real," I said desperately. Emma, someone has photoshopped these images. I've never met this woman. Daniel, my father said sternly, the evidence is overwhelming. Your fiancé has received dozens of messages from this woman, along with photographic proof of your relationship. Continuing to deny it is beneath your dignity. I'm not denying it. I'm telling you it's not true. Someone is setting me up. Who would do something like that? My mother asked, but her tone suggested she didn't believe any explanation I might offer. I looked around the room at the faces of my family, searching for any sign of support or belief. My parents looked at me with disappointment and disgust. Emma looked at me with the broken trust of someone whose faith had been completely shattered. And Michael looked at me with what appeared to be genuine sympathy and regret, but something in his eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, made me suddenly, horribly suspicious. Michael, I said quietly, can I talk to you privately? Daniel, this isn't the time for, my mother began. Please, I interrupted, just 5 minutes. Michael nodded reluctantly and followed me to the backyard, away from Emma and my parents. Tell me you didn't do this, I said as soon as we were alone. What are you talking about? The photos, the fake girlfriend, the messages designed to destroy my relationship with Emma. Tell me you didn't orchestrate this whole thing. Michael's expression was perfectly calibrated, hurt, confused, and slightly offended by my accusation. Danny, I know you're desperate to find someone to blame, but accusing your own brother of sabotaging your relationship is pretty low, even for you. Even for me, what's that supposed to mean? It means you've always been jealous of me, always resented the attention our parents gave me because of my health issues. Now you're looking for a way to make yourself the victim instead of taking responsibility for your own mistakes. What mistakes? Michael, I've never cheated on Emma, never even been tempted to cheat on Emma. Someone created this entire scenario, and you're the only person who benefits from destroying my relationship with her. Michael stepped closer, and for the first time I saw his mask slip slightly. Benefits how? He asked, his voice still calm but with an edge I'd never heard before. You've been interested in Emma since the day we arrived. I've seen the way you look at her, the way you find excuses to be alone with her. If I'm out of the picture. If you're out of the picture, Emma is free to make her own choices about what kind of man she wants to be with, Michael finished. And maybe she'll realize that she deserves someone who actually appreciates her instead of someone who treats her like another achievement to display for his family. The admission was subtle but unmistakable. Michael had been working to undermine my relationship with Emma, and now he was positioning himself as the better alternative. You son of a bitch, I said, taking a step toward him. Careful, Danny, Michael replied, his voice now completely cold. You're already in enough trouble without adding assault to your list of problems. I wanted to hit him. I wanted to grab him by the shirt and force him to admit what he'd done. But I also knew that any physical confrontation would only further convince my family that I was unstable, desperate, and guilty. Instead, I walked back into the house to make one final attempt to convince Emma of the truth. But when I entered the living room, I found my family had made their decision. Daniel, my father said formally, I think it's best if you pack your things and leave. Emma doesn't want to see you right now, and frankly, neither do your mother and I. You're kicking me out of my childhood home based on fabricated evidence. We're asking you to respect Emma's need for space and our need to process what you've done to this family. Emma looked up at me one final time, her beautiful green eyes red with crying but now cold with finality. Daniel, I loved you completely, she said quietly. I trusted you with everything I had, and you betrayed that trust in the cruelest way possible. Emma, please just listen to me for 5 minutes. Let me explain. There's nothing to explain. The evidence is clear, and I'm done listening to lies. What about us? What about our future? There is no us. There is no future. I never want to see you again. An hour later, I was standing on the train platform with a single suitcase, holding a one-way ticket to Portland, Oregon, the farthest destination I could afford with the cash in my wallet. As the train pulled away from the station, I watched my hometown disappear and understood that I was losing more than just Emma and my family. I was losing my entire identity, everything I'd worked to build, everyone I'd ever loved. And somewhere in that familiar house, Michael was probably consoling my heartbroken former fiancé, positioning himself as the shoulder she could cry on, the friend who would help her heal from her terrible betrayal. The perfect plan, executed flawlessly, with consequences I was only beginning to understand. Portland, Oregon, in the summer felt like the end of the world. I'd chosen the destination randomly from the departures board at Union Station, guided only by the desire to put as much distance as possible between myself and the life I'd lost. The city was unfamiliar, expensive, and filled with the kind of creative, progressive people who made my Midwestern sensibilities feel outdated and awkward. I rented a studio apartment in a rundown building in southeast Portland, using the last of my savings for first month's rent and a security deposit. The space was barely 400 square feet, with a Murphy bed that pulled down from the wall, a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and mini refrigerator, and a bathroom so small I had to step into the shower to close the door. It was nothing like the life I'd planned with Emma, nothing like the future I'd been building since I was 18 years old. But it was mine, and it was far enough away that no one from my previous life could find me accidentally. The first few weeks were the darkest of my life. I'd wake up every morning with a moment of disorientation, expecting to find Emma beside me, before reality crashed back with the devastating reminder that she was gone, that my family had disowned me, that everything I'd believed about love and loyalty and justice had been proven false. I found a job waiting tables at a restaurant in downtown Portland, work that required no references, no background checks, no explanations about my past. The pay was barely enough to cover my rent and basic expenses, but it kept me busy during the hours when grief and anger threatened to overwhelm me completely. My coworkers were mostly young artists and musicians, people pursuing creative dreams while paying their bills with service industry work. They were kind but curious, asking questions about my background that I deflected with vague references to family problems, and starting over. "You seem like you're running from something pretty serious," observed Lisa, a bartender who'd been working at the restaurant for 2 years while finishing her MFA in creative writing. "What makes you say that?" "Most people who move across the country for waitressing jobs are either running from something or running towards something, and you don't seem like you're running toward anything." She was perceptive. I wasn't running toward a new life. I was running from the ruins of my old one. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or the loneliness or even the physical discomfort of living in a space barely large enough for one person. The hardest part was the constant internal battle between grief and rage, between mourning what I'd lost and fantasizing about revenge against the brother who'd taken it from me. During my breaks at work, I'd sit in the alley behind the restaurant and replay the events of that terrible Tuesday morning, analyzing every detail, searching for clues I'd missed, trying to understand exactly how Michael had orchestrated my destruction. The fake messages from Jessica had been sophisticated enough to fool Emma completely. Someone had researched her personality, her vulnerabilities, her deepest fears about relationships and commitment. The messages had been crafted to exploit her abandonment issues, her difficulty trusting people, her belief that she wasn't worthy of unconditional love. The photographs had been even more elaborate. Creating convincing images of me with another woman would have required professional skills, expensive software, and detailed knowledge of my appearance and typical clothing. Michael had clearly invested significant time and money in his deception. But most insidious had been the psychological manipulation. Michael had spent weeks undermining Emma's confidence in our relationship, planting seeds of doubt about my commitment, making her feel isolated and uncertain. By the time the fake evidence arrived, Emma had already been primed to believe the worst about me. The plan had been brilliant, thorough, and devastatingly effective. Late at night, lying on my Murphy bed in my tiny apartment, I would fantasize about returning to Chicago, confronting Michael with evidence of his deception, forcing him to confess in front of Emma and my parents. I would imagine their horror at discovering what he'd done, their desperate apologies, their efforts to repair the damage they'd helped inflict. But even in my fantasies, I knew the truth. Without concrete proof of Michael's manipulation, my accusations would sound like the desperate lies of a guilty man. Emma would never believe me, and my parents would never accept that their precious younger son was capable of such calculated cruelty. I was trapped by the perfect nature of Michael's deception. Without concrete evidence, I was just another cheating ex-fiancé making desperate accusations to avoid responsibility for my actions. 3 months into my Portland exile, I'd settled into a routine of numbness. Work at the restaurant, sleep in my cramped apartment, repeat. I'd stopped fantasizing about revenge because those fantasies only made the reality of my powerlessness more painful. That's when everything changed. I came home from a particularly brutal double shift to find a small manila envelope that had been slipped under my apartment door. No return address, no postmark, just my name written in block letters across the front. Inside was a USB drive and a note written on plain white paper. "Play me. You deserve to know the truth. A friend." My hands were shaking as I inserted the USB into my ancient laptop. The drive contained dozens of files, videos, audio recordings, text messages, and documents that would forever change my understanding of what had happened to my life. The first video file was dated 6 weeks before Emma and I had visited my family. It showed Michael in what appeared to be a coffee shop, talking animatedly with a young woman I'd never seen before. The audio was clear enough to hear their entire conversation. "So you understand what I need you to do," Michael was saying. "I create a fake profile, seduce your brother online, make his fiancée think he's cheating," the woman replied. "But Michael, this is pretty elaborate. Are you sure it's worth all this trouble?" "Trust me, Jessica. Emma Richardson is worth any amount of trouble. I've been watching my brother coast through life, getting everything handed to him, never having to fight for anything. It's time he learned what it feels like to lose something he actually cares about. And you think she'll turn to you afterward? She's going to be heartbroken, isolated, convinced that she can't trust men. I'll be the understanding brother-in-law who helps her heal, the shoulder she can cry on, the friend who shows her that not all men are like Daniel. What if she doesn't fall for it? She will. Jessica, I've been studying Emma for months. I know her triggers, her insecurities, her fears about abandonment. The fake affair will confirm every doubt she's ever had about deserving love, and I'll be there to convince her that she deserves better." I paused the video, my heart pounding with a mixture of vindication and rage. Finally, I had proof. Michael hadn't just stolen my fiancée. He'd systematically destroyed my life as part of a calculated plan to take what belonged to me. The next video showed Jessica at a computer, using professional photo editing software to create the compromising images that had convinced Emma of my infidelity. She was working with several photographs of me that could only have been taken by someone with intimate access to my daily routine. "Make sure the lighting matches," Michael's voice said from off-camera. "And remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's believability. Emma needs to see enough detail to convince her, but not so much that she starts analyzing the images forensically." "These are really good photos of your brother," Jessica observed. You must have been following him for weeks. Months, actually. I've been preparing for this since Christmas. My stomach churned as I realized the extent of Michael's premeditation. He'd been planning my destruction for over 6 months, carefully documenting my habits and routines to make his deception more convincing. The audio files were even more damaging. Hours of recorded conversations between Michael and Jessica, planning every detail of their psychological warfare. They'd researched Emma's background, identified her vulnerabilities, and crafted their approach specifically to exploit her deepest fears about relationships and trust. The key is making her feel like she's discovering the affair organically, Michael explained in one recording. If it seems like information is being pushed on her, she'll be suspicious. But if she feels like she's uncovering Daniel's betrayal piece by piece, she'll convince herself that the evidence is real. What about your parents? They'll support whatever decision Emma makes. My mother already thinks Daniel doesn't appreciate how lucky he is to have found someone like Emma. My father has always been skeptical of Daniel's achievements. When they see the evidence of his infidelity, it will confirm everything they've suspected about his character. But the most devastating file was a video recorded just days after I'd been banished from my family home. It showed Michael comforting Emma in what appeared to be my parents' backyard, his arm around her shoulders as she cried. "I can't believe Daniel would do this to me," Emma was saying through her tears. "I can't believe it either," Michael replied, his voice perfectly calibrated to convey sympathy and support. "But Emma, I want you to know that what Daniel did says nothing about you and everything about him. You're an incredible woman who deserves to be loved completely and faithfully." I feel so stupid, so naive. I thought Daniel was different from other men. He fooled all of us. But Emma, not all men are like Daniel. Some of us understand what it means to truly value a woman like you. Emma looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, and I could see the exact moment when Michael's manipulation began to work. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what I would have done without your support through this." "You'll never have to find out," Michael replied, and I could see him calculating his next move even as he comforted my heartbroken fiancée. "I'll always be here for you, Emma. Always." The USB drive contained dozens of similar recordings, documenting Michael's systematic seduction of Emma during the weeks following my exile. He'd used her pain and vulnerability against her, positioning himself as the antidote to my supposed betrayal. The final video was dated just 2 weeks ago. It showed Emma and Michael exchanging vows at a small ceremony in our family's backyard, with my parents beaming proudly as they welcomed their new daughter-in-law. Emma looked beautiful in a simple white dress, but her smile seemed fragile, like someone still healing from trauma. Michael looked triumphant, like a man who'd won a prize he'd been coveting for years. "You may kiss the bride," the officiating minister said. As Michael and Emma kissed, I could see my parents in the background, my mother wiping away tears of joy, my father nodding approvingly at his younger son's happiness. They'd all moved on without me. Worse, they'd all benefited from my absence. I sat alone in my tiny Portland apartment, staring at the wedding video of my brother and the woman I'd planned to marry, and felt something inside me crystallize into a cold, hard resolve. Michael had spent months planning my destruction. Now I was going to spend however long it took planning his. The anonymous sender of the USB drive had included one final file that I initially overlooked, a comprehensive dossier on Michael's life since my exile. Bank records, credit reports, employment information, social media activity, and personal communications that revealed the full scope of his current situation. Michael had leveraged his marriage to Emma and his parents' pride in his maturity to secure a position at a prestigious Chicago marketing firm. He'd used my father's accounting connections and my mother's teacher network to build a professional reputation, based largely on family endorsements rather than actual qualifications. More importantly, he'd convinced Emma to co-sign for several major financial commitments: a mortgage on an expensive condominium, luxury car payments, and business loans for a consulting venture he claimed would make them wealthy within 5 years. The financial records showed a pattern of reckless spending and poor decision-making that Michael had hidden from both Emma and our parents. He'd run up significant credit card debt, made risky investments with money he couldn't afford to lose, and borrowed against future earnings that existed only in his imagination. But most interesting of all was Michael's apparent inability to remain faithful to the woman he'd destroyed my life to possess. The USB drive contained photographs and documentation of Michael's ongoing affair with Jessica, the same woman he'd hired to impersonate my fictional mistress. Their relationship had continued long after its original purpose had been served, evolving from a business arrangement into a genuine romantic entanglement that Michael was carefully hiding from his new wife. The cruel irony was perfect. Michael had accused me of infidelity to steal Emma, then proceeded to actually commit the infidelity he'd falsely attributed to me. As I reviewed the evidence, a comprehensive revenge strategy began to form in my mind. Michael had attacked me on multiple fronts: personal, financial, professional, and social. My response needed to be equally comprehensive and devastatingly more effective. I spent the next 2 weeks planning every detail of Michael's destruction, approaching it with the same methodical intensity I'd once applied to academic research. I opened several new email accounts, purchased prepaid phones, and created online personas that would allow me to operate without being traced back to my real identity. Phase 1 of my plan focused on Michael's professional reputation. Using the evidence from the USB drive, I began systematically contacting his clients, employers, and professional references with anonymous packages that revealed his history of deception and manipulation. I sent his boss at the marketing firm copies of the recordings where Michael bragged about destroying his brother's life, along with documentation showing how he'd used family connections to secure his position despite lacking relevant experience. I forwarded his business partners copies of his communications with Jessica, demonstrating his willingness to use elaborate deception to achieve personal goals. I provided his professional references with evidence that his character testimonials from family members were based on lies they'd been told about his role in ending my relationship with Emma. Within 3 weeks, Michael had been terminated from his marketing position and dropped by his business partners. His professional network, built on family endorsements and false representations, crumbled as people realized they'd been deceived about his character and qualifications. Phase 2 targeted his financial security. Using my economics background and the detailed financial information in the USB drive, I began a systematic campaign to destroy Michael's credit and expose his risky spending patterns to Emma. I contacted credit card companies with evidence that Michael had been using Emma's social security number and financial information to secure credit without her knowledge. I provided mortgage companies with documentation showing that Michael had misrepresented his income and employment stability on their loan applications. Most devastatingly, I forwarded Emma copies of Michael's affair with Jessica, including explicit photographs and love letters that proved his infidelity had been ongoing since before their wedding. The package I sent Emma included a carefully crafted letter. "Emma, I know you have no reason to trust anonymous correspondence, but I believe you deserve to know the truth about the man you married. The enclosed evidence shows that Michael Matthews has been systematically deceiving you about his finances, his fidelity, and his character. The same man who convinced you that his brother was unfaithful has been cheating on you since before your wedding day. You deserve better than this, and you deserve to make decisions about your future based on the truth rather than the lies Michael has constructed around his life. A friend who cares about justice. Phase 3 was the most personally satisfying, exposing Michael's deception to our parents and extended family. I compiled a comprehensive presentation that revealed every aspect of Michael's scheme against me, including the audio recordings of him planning my destruction, the video evidence of his manipulation, and proof of his ongoing affair with Jessica. I sent copies to my parents, my aunts and uncles, family friends, and everyone who had witnessed my exile and shunning. The package included a cover letter that simply said, "The evidence speaks for itself. Michael Matthews destroyed his brother's life and marriage through systematic deception and manipulation. Every person who supported his actions based on fabricated evidence should know the truth about the man they chose to believe over Daniel. Justice delayed is not justice denied." Phase 4 involved Jessica directly. Using one of my anonymous email accounts, I contacted her with copies of all the evidence I'd gathered about Michael's financial problems, his lies to Emma, and his use of their affair to destroy my life. "Jessica, you were hired to help destroy an innocent man's life, but you've become an ongoing participant in Michael Matthews' pattern of deception. The man you're having an affair with has convinced his wife to cosign for debts he can't pay, lied about his employment to secure loans, and is using you to continue betraying the woman he stole from his brother. You can choose to remain complicit in his schemes, or you can protect yourself by exposing the truth. I've included evidence that shows Michael has been recording your intimate conversations and keeping documentation that could implicate you in identity fraud and conspiracy. You might want to consider making your own deal before he decides you know too much." Within 48 hours, Jessica had contacted Emma directly and confessed to their affair, providing even more evidence of Michael's deception than I'd been able to gather independently. The systematic destruction of Michael's life unfolded exactly as I'd planned. Within 6 weeks of receiving the anonymous USB drive, I'd obliterated his career, his marriage, his financial security, and his family relationships. Michael's response was everything I'd hoped for and more. The first sign that my revenge campaign was working came through social media. One of my Northwestern classmates, who'd remained Facebook friends with me despite my exile, posted a screenshot of a Chicago Tribune article with a brief message. "Daniel, thought you'd want to see this." The article was titled, "Local Marketing Executive Terminated Amid Fraud Allegations," and featured a photograph of Michael looking haggard and defensive as he left his former office building. Michael Matthews, 24, was dismissed from his position at Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, following an internal investigation that revealed misrepresentations on his job application and evidence of using company resources for personal business ventures. Sources close to the situation indicate that Matthews had fabricated several professional references and concealed relevant background information during his hearing process. The investigation began after the company received anonymous documentation suggesting that Matthews' employment history and character references contained significant inaccuracies. A spokesperson for Pinnacle Marketing declined to comment on specific details, but confirmed that Matthews is no longer employed by the firm and that they are reviewing their hearing procedures to prevent similar situations in the future. Reading about Michael's professional humiliation felt better than I'd anticipated, but it was only the beginning. 2 weeks later, Emma called me. I was working the dinner shift at the Portland restaurant when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, but somehow knew I'd been waiting for. I stepped into the alley behind the building and answered. "Daniel." Emma's voice was smaller than I remembered, uncertain and fragile. "Emma, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "Michael has been lying about everything. The affair, the photos, the messages from Jessica, none of it was real. He orchestrated the whole thing to break us up." even though I'd been expecting this call. Hearing Emma acknowledge the truth felt like vindication and heartbreak combined. "I know," I said quietly. "You know, Daniel, how could you know? Someone sent me evidence. Recordings, videos, documentation of everything Michael did. I've known the truth for 2 months." There was a long silence. When Emma spoke again, her voice was thick with tears. "Then why didn't you contact me? Why didn't you tell me what he'd done?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me. Emma, I tried to tell you the truth that day in my parents' living room, and everyone, including you, thought I was lying. If I'd called you with accusations against Michael, you would have assumed I was desperate and delusional. But if you had evidence, would you have looked at it? Would you have listened to recordings that contradicted everything you'd been told about me? Or would you have assumed they were fake, that I'd somehow fabricated them to win you back?" Emma was quiet because we both knew the answer. She wouldn't have believed me, and Michael would have convinced her that any evidence I presented was further proof of my dishonesty and desperation. "Daniel, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I married him. I trusted him. I let him convince me that you were capable of betraying me when he was the one who'd been manipulating both of us. Where are you now?" "I'm staying with a friend. I left Michael when Jessica showed me the proof of their affair. But even before that, I'd been getting anonymous packages with evidence of his financial lies, his professional deception, everything he'd hidden from me." "Anonymous packages." "Someone has been systematically exposing every lie Michael ever told. His job, his business ventures, his faithfulness, all of it was fake. Daniel, did you?" "Did I what?" "Did you send those packages?" I considered lying, but Emma deserved honesty after everything she'd endured. "Some of them," I admitted. How did you get access to all that information?" "Someone sent me a USB drive with evidence of Michael's plan against me. But I had to dig deeper to find proof of what he'd been doing since I left." "Daniel, I don't understand. Who would have been recording Michael's conversations? Who would have access to his financial records and personal communications?" It was a good question, one I'd been puzzling over since receiving the anonymous package. Someone with significant resources and technical skills had been documenting Michael's activities far more comprehensively than I could have managed from Portland. "I don't know," I said. "But whoever it was, they wanted me to know the truth, and they wanted Michael's victims to understand what kind of man they were dealing with." "What happens now?" Emma asked. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to undo everything. I want to take back the last 8 months, to never have doubted you, to never have trusted Michael. But I can't, can I?" The pain in her voice was evident, and part of me wanted to comfort her, to tell her that we could rebuild what we'd lost. But too much had changed. Too much damage had been done. "Emma, I loved you completely. I was ready to build a life with you based on trust and partnership. But that life ended the day you chose to believe Michael's lies over my truthfulness. Even now, knowing what you know, can you honestly say you trust me the way you did before?" Emma was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," she whispered. "Daniel, I want to trust you. I want to believe we could find our way back to each other. But you're right, something fundamental has been broken. And I've changed too. Living in exile, working minimum wage jobs, watching my family celebrate their decision to cast me out, it's made me harder, less forgiving, less willing to rebuild bridges that other people burned. So this is it. We can never go back. We can't go back. But Emma, you can go forward. You can rebuild your life based on truth instead of manipulation. You can find someone who will love you without using that love as a weapon. What about you? What will you do?" I looked around the alley where I was standing, at the restaurant where I'd been working for minimum wage, at the life I'd constructed from the ruins of the one Michael had destroyed. "I'm going to finish what I started," I said. After hanging up with Emma, I realized that my revenge against Michael was far from complete. Destroying his career and marriage had been satisfying, but it hadn't addressed the deeper injustice of his actions or provided consequences proportional to the damage he'd inflicted. Michael had spent months systematically planning my destruction. He'd used my family's dynamics against me, exploited Emma's vulnerabilities, and convinced everyone I cared about that I was a liar and a cheater. The scope of his deception had been breathtaking in its thoroughness. My response needed to be equally comprehensive and permanent. Over the following weeks, I expanded my campaign to include every aspect of Michael's social and professional network. I contacted his college friends with evidence of his character, his professional references with proof of his deception, and his social media connections with documentation of his systematic manipulation. I created a website detailing Michael's scheme against me, complete with audio recordings, video evidence, and financial documentation that proved his pattern of deception. The website was professionally designed and optimized for search engines, ensuring that anyone who Googled Michael's name would immediately discover the truth about his character. I contacted journalists at Chicago newspapers and television stations, providing them with a comprehensive story about corporate fraud, family betrayal, and systematic manipulation that had all the elements of a compelling investigative piece. But my most satisfying revenge was yet to come. Using the financial information I'd gathered about Michael's debts and obligations, I discovered that he'd been using Emma's credit and cosignature to secure loans far beyond their ability to repay. When Emma left him, she'd become liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt that Michael had accumulated through his reckless spending and failed business ventures. I contacted Emma with detailed financial advice about how to protect herself from Michael's creditors, including legal strategies for demonstrating that she'd been a victim of financial fraud rather than a willing participant in his schemes. More importantly, I provided her with evidence that could help her pursue civil litigation against Michael for the financial damage he'd caused through his deception. Emma, I told her during our follow-up phone conversation, Michael didn't just destroy our relationship. He's destroyed your financial future unless you take legal action to protect yourself from his debts and recover damages for his fraud. What kind of legal action? Sue him for every penny he's cost you, plus punitive damages for emotional distress and fraud. Make him personally responsible for rebuilding the life he's damaged. Daniel, I can't afford attorneys for that kind of litigation. You can if the case is strong enough to attract attorneys willing to work on contingency. And Emma, with the evidence I can provide, your case would be extremely strong. 6 months after receiving the anonymous USB drive, I'd systematically destroyed every aspect of Michael's life while simultaneously helping his victims recover and move forward. Michael was unemployed, divorced, financially ruined, and facing multiple civil lawsuits from people he'd defrauded. His reputation in Chicago was permanently destroyed, his family relationships were severed, and his future prospects were essentially non-existent. But the most satisfying part wasn't Michael's destruction, it was the restoration of truth. My parents had received copies of all the evidence against Michael, along with a detailed explanation of how they'd been manipulated into abandoning their older son. They'd reached out through intermediaries, attempting to apologize and rebuild our relationship, but their efforts felt hollow and self-serving. Emma had successfully sued Michael for financial fraud and won a judgment that would protect her credit and provide compensation for the damage he'd inflicted on her life. She'd also moved to Seattle and started medical school, pursuing the dreams that Michael's manipulation had temporarily derailed. And I had learned something valuable about justice, revenge, and the importance of patience in pursuing both. Epilogue: The long game. 3 years after returning to Portland with nothing but a suitcase and a burning desire for revenge, I was sitting in my own office, A real office, with windows and proper lighting and furniture that belonged to me. I'd used my economics degree and the investigative skills I developed during my campaign against Michael to build a consulting business helping fraud victims recover damages and rebuild their lives. My first major client had been myself, documenting and pursuing financial recovery for the losses I'd sustained due to Michael's actions. My second client had been Emma, though by then our relationship was purely professional. My subsequent clients had been other victims of elaborate deception schemes, people who needed someone who understood both the emotional trauma and the practical challenges of rebuilding after systematic betrayal. The work was meaningful, profitable, and personally satisfying in ways that my original academic and policy career aspirations had never been. I was helping people who'd been victimized by exactly the kind of manipulation I'd experienced, and I was very good at it. My phone rang, interrupting my review of a case file involving a corporate embezzlement scheme. Daniel Matthews Consulting, I answered. Mr. Matthews, my name is Sarah Chen. I was referred to you by Emma Richardson. She said you might be able to help me with a situation involving financial fraud and systematic deception. What kind of situation? My ex-husband destroyed my credit, stole my identity, and convinced my family that I was mentally unstable so he could gain control of my inheritance. I have evidence that he orchestrated an elaborate scheme to isolate me and steal everything I owned, but I don't know how to pursue justice or recover what he took. The story was familiar: systematic manipulation, family betrayal, financial fraud designed to destroy someone's life while enriching the perpetrator. Ms. Chen, I said, I'd be happy to review your case. Can you come in this week for an initial consultation? Yes, thank you. Mr. Matthews, there's one more thing you should know. What's that? The man who did this to me is Michael Matthews. Emma said you might have personal experience with his methods. I was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Michael had apparently continued his pattern of manipulation and fraud with new victims, using the same systematic approach he'd perfected with Emma and me. Ms. Chen, I said finally, I'll take your case, and I can promise you that Michael Matthews will face consequences for his actions that are comprehensive, permanent, and entirely appropriate to the damage he's caused. After scheduling Sarah's consultation, I leaned back in my office chair and considered the strange path that had led me to this moment. 3 years ago, I'd been a broken man living in a studio apartment, consumed with grief and rage over my brother's betrayal. Now I was a successful consultant with a growing reputation for helping fraud victims achieve justice, financial recovery, and personal healing. I'd built a life based on my own values and abilities, free from the family dynamics that had shaped my first 24 years. Most importantly, I'd learned that the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's building something so valuable, so meaningful, and so successful that their ability to hurt you becomes irrelevant. Michael had tried to destroy me because he was jealous of what I'd built with Emma. His victory had been temporary, his methods had been exposed, and his reputation had been permanently ruined. But I had moved beyond him entirely. My success wasn't measured in comparison to Michael's failures. It was measured by the clients I'd helped, the frauds I'd exposed, and the meaningful work I'd created from the ashes of my original plans. That evening, I called Emma to let her know about Sarah Chen's case. Daniel, she said, I'm glad Sarah contacted you. She deserves better than what Michael did to her. How are you doing? How's medical school? Challenging but wonderful. I'm in my second year now, focusing on pediatric rotations. It's everything I dreamed it would be. I'm happy for you. Daniel, I need to tell you something. I've been seeing someone, a fellow medical student. It's serious. That's wonderful, Emma. You deserve to be happy. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Michael hadn't interfered? if we'd gotten married as planned. Sometimes, I admitted, but I think we both became stronger people because of what we survived. You're going to be an incredible doctor, and I'm doing work that matters to me in ways I never expected. So you don't regret how things turned out. I regret Michael's actions and the pain they caused, but I don't regret the life I've built afterward. Emma, what we had was real and meaningful, but it belonged to the people we were before Michael's betrayal changed us. We're different now, hopefully better, certainly stronger. I love you, Daniel. Not romantically, but as someone who shared something important with me and helped me become who I am now. I love you too, Emma, and I'm grateful that Michael's worst impulses led to something positive for both of us. After hanging up, I walked to the window of my Portland office and looked out at the city that had given me refuge when I'd needed it most. Tomorrow, I would meet with Sarah Chen and begin the process of holding Michael accountable for yet another life he tried to destroy. The work would be satisfying, profitable, and just. But more importantly, it would prove once again that the best revenge is living well, building something meaningful, and using your own success to help other people achieve justice. Michael Matthews had taught me that family loyalty could be a weapon, that love could be manipulated, and that even the people closest to you were capable of breathtaking cruelty. But he'd also taught me that survival was possible, that justice could be patient, and that the most devastating revenge was becoming someone whose success made his betrayal irrelevant. It was a lesson worth 3 years of exile, a destroyed engagement, and the complete rebuilding of my life. Some educations are expensive, but they're also invaluable.